Welcome back to Cheche, the program where opinion counts. The opinions counting this morning are those of celebrated author and playwright Ngugi wa Thiong'o. And so you've won lots of awards, lots of accolades, and twice now we've expected you to bring home to Kenya the Nobel Prize for Literature. That hasn't happened. How does that sit with you?
You know, the biggest Nobel one can get, for me personally, is actually what you get from the people. By this I mean, of course, it would be good to get a Nobel Prize or any other recognition for that matter in a formal sense, you know. But you know, sometimes you meet a Kenyan, an African, or a non-African, anywhere in the world, and they tell you, I read Weep No Child, it affected me in this way. I once met, I was visiting India some years ago, and I met somebody who was not very much active in politics, and he said, literally, these are his words, you know, he'd come to the end of his sense of life. I think he was going to take his life. He happened to enter a bookshop in India. He picked the devil on a cross, and the sense of struggle that he had to fight back in life, you know, turned his life around. This is a very big commendation, not only for a particular book or a particular writer, but for what books and art can do, a sense of, you know, empowerment. So when someone reads my book and tell me it affected them in this way positively, is a great,
it's a great honor.
Yeah, it's a great honor, and it's really something.
But then, nonetheless, the Nobel symbolizes recognition for the entire body of work.
Yes.
And there are those who feel that part of the reason why you haven't won a Nobel Prize has to do with your decision, a controversial one, to start publishing in Kikuyu.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
No. Also, I don't know, because I don't really know what goes on in it. It's a jury, and so you can never really tell. But for me, I will never, and I have never apologized for writing in Gikuyu as an African language. It's very important. I can overstress the importance of our languages as a base of our entry into the world, okay? So if I got a Nobel Prize, I like to feel that my writing in an African language had something to do with it, right?
The background to this, though, is that for a long time you were also fighting for the recognition of work done by Africans to be recognized as African literature. You took exception to students studying English, as it were. English literature, but also just English, everything to do with literature being referred to, you know, being grouped as English.
Again, we come back, remember the Nairobi literature debate in the 1969, when I was a member of the literature, it was then called the English department. And many people don't realize that the debates we had in Nairobi at that time are the foundation of what now in the world is called post-colonial theory. It started in Nairobi, at the University of Nairobi, through that debate, including the statement which we made at the time with Tabano Leong and Ogwara Nyumba on the abolition of the English department. This statement, even today, in many countries in the world, is read over and over, is studied in colleges and universities all over the world.
Why? What was the statement? What were you trying to say?
What I'm trying to say is this, you know, that we must start with ourselves. You have to start with what's around you. And from where you are, connect to the world. We are not rejecting English literature as English literature. It's the relationship of that literature to ourselves. Why can't we start with Kenya? This is our basic question. Why must we start with London, with England, geography, history, and so on? Why can't we start with Kenya, East Africa, Africa, literature of African peoples from the Caribbean, Africa, America, Asian literature, and then European literature. So it's a question of relationship. Because remember, colonial education was a process of taking people mentally away from themselves.
The question, though, is this: when you write the books, okay, you're still writing in both English and...
Just a minute, I want to stay with this issue of African literature, but yet you are a professor of comparative literature and English.
Yeah.
So that's a contradiction, no?
No. In this way, I'm now actually distinguished professor of English and comparative literature at the University of California, Irvine. Okay, that's a job I do there.
That's the job you do.
If I'm teaching literature in Kenya or Africa, for that matter, it means it's only reasonable that you start with what is around you. And I'm going back to it because of its very implications. Because colonial education and the whole colonial process really wants to take people away from themselves, away from our languages, away from our skin, our hair, everything about.
And you've made that point, sir. The point I'm trying to get you to respond to is, given that you have argued for this, being close, recognizing oneself, and your job title is Distinguished Professor of English and Comparative Literature, would it not have made sense for you to have taken this platform that you have, given your recognition and the plaudits you received over the years, and begin to push those ideas?
I still do, even under that umbrella. But remember, they don't. By the way, no university right now has a chair in literature in African languages. We're still struggling even now. So it's not
even with your profile, you can't achieve that.
No, what I'm saying, it's a job. There's no job description says here's a job with people who have specialized in literature written in African languages, or whose only knowledge is African languages. Tomorrow, if there is one here in Kenya, I'll be the first to apply, right? But the key thing is what I do with that title. All over the world, I go around advocating the primacy of whatever is the language of one's cultural foundation. If you're in England, it's okay. I don't want to ask you if you're in England to start learning, say, Kiswahili as the basis of your education. If you're in France, you start with French. If you're in China, you start with Chinese.
Okay, so when you're writing Kikuyu, which is one of the questions from our viewers, what is your target readership? How are non-Kikuyu supposed to read the books?
The key thing is we have translations. Okay? So, for instance, Devil on the Cross was first published as Shaitani Mudharafaine. It's now available in Kiswahili as Shetani Msalabani. It's available in English as Devil on the Cross. Just in the same way, I know Russian literature, but it was not first written in Kiswahili. It was written in Russian, and I read them in translation. I read Japanese literature. It was first written not in Gikuyu or Kiswahili, but written in Japanese. I read in translation. Translation is how languages speak to each other. And in Africa, you can get a novel written, say, in Luo. You can have it translated into Kikuyu, into Griama.
But you appreciate that only some works get translated. So the loss of the untranslated works is quite big, isn't it?
Yeah, of course, the ideal would be if all works were translated. But just now, there's minimal conversation between African languages, even within Kenya.
The challenge is that even that Kikuyu novel, which you write in Kikuyu, how many people read Kikuyu now? Because Kikuyu is not, except now they have introduced the mother tongue languages taught in schools. Not many Kikuyus read Kikuyu.
Now you're making a very good point. What you're telling me is that mental colonization has reached a stage where now people don't even recognize their own languages.
That's a fact.
But we have to fight. We can't accept mental slavery. We cannot accept mental colonization. We have to find a way of fighting this. Let me tell you something. When the French people, one of the French founders of Alliance Française in about 1912, he is quoted as having said, since these countries must change, what we can do to retain them within our orbit is tie their minds to French language. So for them, French language was a way of tying the mind of the middle class to French. The British did the same thing, okay? Tie the mind of the middle class to England, through language. But you see, the key thing is this: there's nothing wrong with English or French. What's wrong is acquisition of English and French and abandonment of our languages, right? Let me put it another way. If you know all the languages of the world and you don't know your mother tongue, all the language of your culture, that's the same thing as enslavement. There's no other way of putting it. But if you know your language or the language of your culture, and you know all the language of the world on top, that's empowerment.
Well, skeptics would argue that what is the value you attach to, I mean, what is the mission, what is your mission? To convert the world to adopt your language? Is it to extend the territory of your culture,
your ideas
and culture?
Yeah, but you know...
And language is, of course, the vessel through which you will transmit that.
Yeah.
But in terms of achieving the objective of conquering the rest, how many Americans, for example, Brits or Belgians or Russians, have learned or studied Kikuyu, for example?
But
as a measure of your achievement.
Yeah, as I said, translation is always the key. You know, I know Russian literature, but through translation, okay, you know. But you don't achieve anything by abandoning what is yours. You don't abandon your own house and say, oh, that house of my neighbor. Oh, that's very beautiful.
I want to pick you up on that because it's almost as if writing for you was a form of protest. It was your fight against colonialism. Some people picked up arms and killed, but for you, you picked up your pen and you wrote.
Yeah, empowerment, because I want to empower. I want a Kenyan or an African going somewhere not be ashamed of this African language and to say, I know Kikuyu, but I also know Luo, I also know Kiswahili, I also know English, I also know French, I also know Russian, Chinese, and so that's empowerment. So if but I don't want a Kenyan or an African to go say, oh, I can speak English very well, and through the nose. But when you ask him some in Kikuyu or in Kiswahili, oh, what are you saying? Huh? Right? Let me put it this way. The younger generation are the ones who are going to take over this country, isn't it? I mean, in the future, whatever. Do you want to educate children who cannot speak to the Kenyan population in their own languages? However many they are,
they can speak, but they can't read. Apart from
they must be able to read.
No.
Okay, listen to this. I salute you, Professor Ngugi. Your works are global. Now that Kenya is divided along ethnic and party lines, do you think your advocacy for vernacular languages would promote cohesion or not?
It will. No, first of all, Kenya is not divided as an ethnic line. I've said this. Please mark my words. There are only two tribes in Kenya. The tribes of the have tribe and have not tribe. And if you want to, you can test it. Go among the Luo community. You find poor people there, very wealthy people. Go to the Kikuyu community, very poor people, very rich people. Go to the coast, the same.
That's social stratification, not linguistic.
Yeah, but no, first of all, social is important. Because when we're talking about empowerment of people, we're talking about empowerment of the regular person, okay, isn't it? You know, linguistic, you don't unite people by abandoning their languages. We cannot say,
but okay, the problem, you don't do that, but also you must appreciate, though, Prof, that the language is actually alienating to the cohesion at some point, isn't it?
No, wait a minute. Let's get this clear.
It is in this context, in this country. It is an aspect of the alienation of communities.
If you are ashamed of your mother tongue, what likelihood do you have that you respect other mother tongues that are related to yours, right? You must first get, if you want to communicate with the Kenyan people, with ordinary person, we must respect the languages they speak. But we also have to forge a language of intra-community communication. And in Kenya, we are very lucky. We have got Kiswahili, okay? Then we can have a language of international communication. We have got English and so on, you know. But what I find insidious, quite frankly, and actually a criminal, let me use the word criminal here. I cannot stand, I don't see how African governments allow children to be beaten in schools for speaking their mother tongue.
Okay.
And punished. This is really, it's a crime, really.
Right.
It's a child abuse.
I want to come to the panel because we're talking about language, and Professor Wathiongo is talking to us about language as identity, right? And ownership of that identity. And language not necessarily eroding cohesion. Let's take the example of Rwanda and the genocide. Hutus, Tutsis, they spoke the same language, and the language of genocide was Kinyarwanda. Right? So if we are arguing about language, whether we should promote vernacular languages or not, do we not need to separate politics, as the professor is arguing, from language, David?
In fact, not even Rwanda, Somalia.
Right.
They are fighting, not because
That's
of
a more recent
ethnicity.
example, yes.
Rwanda the same. They speak all Kiswahili, so there is a difference. But my problem with them is this. Apart from your book, you are writing first of all, there is a difference between writing and reading.
Right. I presume so.
And speaking and reading.
Right.
There are a lot of people who have music in Kikuyu. There's a lot of Kikuyu music in India and but there's not many books. Those people who are singing in Kikuyu language and playing music in Kikuyu language may not necessarily read Kikuyu. They don't know how to read Kikuyu. Because Kikuyu is not taught in
Just a minute, I'd just like to give David an opportunity to respond to the language and separation.
Woodwork raises a very fundamental question here, and Mutegi has added the Somali dimension. There is a point at which, of course, one cannot underestimate the value of language as an identity. But in our political and social context, it becomes a tool of alienation and a factor of oppression if it is used against those non-speakers of that language.
The content.
And it becomes the currency through which oppression is transacted, or dominance, for example. That is why in our societies, there is that push to have something that is national, that takes us from, not say abandon, but reduce, suppress your ethnicity a little more to allow the national in you to come out. And that balance is where we fail.
What means assume that the foreign is what becomes national? No, I mean, what I'm saying is that
it may not be foreign. No, it may even be Kiswahili.
No. Wait a minute.
Yes.
What people talk when they talk about national, they mean that English is more of a national cohesive instrument than Kiswahili. In Kenya, we have Kiswahili for good. They say, let's have three language policy in Kenya. You know your mother tongue, be it Luo, Kingriam, or Kikamba, Then Kiswahili as the language of communication across the nation.
Yes.
And then English as a language of beyond Kenya or whatever, adding to the two languages you already have.
Yes.
Say your mother tongue, Kiswahili, and then English. Then it becomes powerful. What I'm arguing about for the empowerment of the Kenyan as opposed to his enslavement.
Yes.
And let me just repeat this. If you know your mother tongue, then you add Kiswahili, then you add English.
Yes.
Power.
That's a perfect
scenario. But if you know only English and you don't know your mother tongue, what happens if you're made a district officer and go in work saying among Kamba people?
Answer my question.
Will you be having interpreters to interpret for you when you're talking to Kamba people?
But again, Professor, before Professor gets out of there, what is the difference? I mean, for heaven's sake, Kamba could be English to a lawyer. What is different? I mean, what is Kenya?
But you're not going to, you're not going with Kamba language, going to Nyanza to speak with people of Nyanza in Kamba language, really.
They still have to get to another language.
No, but
they have to go to England and then come back to Nyanza. Or go to Pwani and then come back to...
That's why we have Kiswahili. Kiswahili is an African language, first and foremost.
Yes.
Yeah. Kiswahili, again, we've been taught...
So it's about black, about African, right?
No, both African and also black and everything. Everything from which we have been alienated, okay?
Yes.
Now, what I'm saying is in Kenya, we have 3-language policy. Aggressively pursued. You have your mother tongue, whether it's Koyo, Luo, Kigriama, Kisomali, anything, okay? Yeah. Add to that Kiswahili, which is also an African language developed, along the East African coast, by African people, and then English, and any other languages we can add thereafter. What I'm really objecting to, and I want to stress it because it's very, very important, is this question of language abandonment by the African middle class. Because remember, even now, Luo language is used among the Luo community by regular people, Kikuyu language as well. Yeah. The people who become alienated from that language are actually the middle class, who are supposed to provide leadership.
But I'm asking
in health, agriculture, and so on.
My quarrel with you is this.
Okay.
Apart from you writing those books, who else is writing school books for children in Kikuyu?
No.
Are they there?
No, wait, no.
So people may speak Kikuyu, but when it comes to reading except the Bible,
that's why
the only thing that is being translated in vernacular languages is the Bible, by the Bible Translation Committee.
Yeah.
Otherwise, nobody else is writing school books.
Yeah. No, they are writing. That's why we need aggressive government policies, Policy change is a must. It's not only in Kenya, but in Africa as a whole. There's so much resources are put into English and French, and very minuscule, literally minuscule, almost zero resources into African languages. Yeah. I'm telling you, today, if you get a change, aggressive change in government policy towards African languages, or in Kenya.
Just a minute.
Let me finish this one. If you get actually a change in policy, the first thing you'll do is get a lot of publishing houses engaged in want to publish in African languages. You get many writers writing in Luo, in Griama, and so on. And also you get many translations. See a story written in Kikamba, it can be translated into Kikuyu, into Luo, and so on. So that way you get national conversation. A character, say, in Griama, with a Griama name and so on, being read, say, in northern Kenya, children identify with that character or hating that character or whatever. So that way you make our cultures really in languages in a conversation with each other. Okay? But the way we are doing now, we don't solve a problem by running away from it. Because we are doing right now is what the colonial made us do, run away from ourselves. Say, we can only be ourselves in
another language. I'll challenge you.
In English or in French or whatsoever.
So I'll challenge you because amongst your contemporaries, you seem to be aligned with the late Chinua Achebe because he also argued for African languages and in fact had a project to translate great classics into his own mother tongue, Igbo. But he went further. His point of departure from yours was saying that he can take English, which is an instrument of the oppressor, and make it his own.
Why can't we make, why do I need to take the language of oppressor and make it my own when I got my own? Why can't I have my own and add?
Look at the way you're dressed, though. You're talking about identity, and language is an expression of identity. Look at the way you're dressed.
Okay. Am I dressed well?
You are dressed well, but you're dressed in Western clothes.
No.
And so if we want to take this issue of identity to the extreme, you are selling out.
No, listen to me. What I'm saying, I'm not talking about simple identity, I'm talking about empowerment. Okay? And you don't get empowerment by running away from ourselves. I like to wear designer clothes designed in Kenya, but drawing from African designer traditions, for instance, And by that I don't mean return to how we were dressed in 19th century. Because remember, in 19th century, people were dressing in the best way they could at the time, the best they had at the time. But we can draw a lot from that tradition, okay, and while taking the needs of today into account. And I'm challenging, let's get African designers.
But Prof, okay.
As they are doing now, by the way, they are doing now, and that's very, very good.
And they have been.
Yeah. So you're saying I should have actually won.
No, I'm just
and I agree with you.
I'm just asking you, if you say that we must empower ourselves by taking everything that is ours, and there's an argument that you can take English and make it yours, in the same way that we have taken Western dressing and made it ours, what's the problem?
No.
Because what you're saying is very binary.
And domesticate a foreign practice.
Yes.
And make
what I'm saying,
you're giving us a very binary argument.
Let me say it's a very important binary. Because the binary we have adopted so far is one where they say we abandon what, There's no reason why, in terms of clothes and architecture, we can't design things that are rooted in our experience of history.
Prof, the argument is
wait a minute.
Say
No.
Okay.
And then add and borrow from others. There's nothing wrong in getting things or ideas from others, even ideas of clothes or architecture, but you add them to what you have. What I'm saying, whether it's in architecture, whether in language, whether in clothes, whether in our bodies and so on, is when you reject your own and say that I can only be human.
This is a word
by somebody else.
Prof, they are the counter argument of this professor is this, that do you first of all subscribe to the notion of a global, that the world has become a global village, one. And in pursuant to that, in that global village, it's a contest for the best. What wins, what is applicable to me, what I can use in my circumstances, what makes life better, faster, and easier, is what people are going for. Are you saying that because of this Africanness, you must continue resisting change even when you think your taste? Because when you use the word abandon, it is as if it's a decision to run away from something. It could be a change of taste. For example, just the way somebody in Scotland could come here and like our dress or Masai shukas and borrow and take it there.
Steal ideas, go and patent
No, still. When we take Western things, we're not stealing. When they take ours, they're stealing.
No. Wait a minute. Let's get this clear, The global begins where we are.
With the local.
There's nothing like global that does not begin where we are. And the mistake
That's local.
No. The mistake we are made to believe is that there's something called global. That's not Kenyan. That's not African. Why can't, think of the global then in this way, ideally. Think of the global then as an ocean. Say ocean. There are many streams, many rivers contribute to that ocean. Okay? Those rivers, African, European, Asian, and so on. What our pattern of behavior right now is saying that Africa has nothing to contribute to that ocean of globality, right? We think it's global. And you ask many people what they mean by global, they mean what's actually in London and New York and so on. They don't mean that what's in Kenyan, what's in River Road or other government road in Nairobi.
It can be global if it's adopted by many people.
I will put your question back to you, because think about Western companies going into India or China and how they behave. They adapt to those markets. Okay? Think about the number of people who are now trying to learn Chinese. Why doesn't the same happen when you come to Africa?
Because it's become dominant. You see, a thing attracts a following or utility by virtue of it becoming... It's like, to use the same example that Professor has given. We have an ocean. Rivers are flowing in the African, European, American, and so forth. It's a boiling pot. It boils things. The ones which come on top in that contest
are universal, therefore, you may go to the sea, deep sea and pick what is under there.
Who said Africa
I am saying, okay, if that's the point. If African ideas can come to the top, then they'll be the global ideas. But we can't insist that they are top if they are not top, okay? If they are being outsmarted by the others.
Yeah, let me tell you something which I think people don't realize. That Africa is the one continent which has been contributing to modernity. Africa has been contributing to the future of the Europe. Okay? Africa has been donating to the West. Africa has been the constant donor to the West in terms of our resources, our gold, our diamonds, our copper, our labor, everything is the African continent. Even including our bodies. Including including our bodies, you know, slavery and slave trade was African bodies being sold, okay? So we're saying the continent of Africa, which is the biggest continent in the world, is the one which has been contributing its resources to the future of Europe. And my own contention is that it's time African resources went to building Africa's future.
And that's a good point to take a break. Right. Okay, we have to take a break now. We'll be back with Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o shortly.